there was very limited coverage of that, and I'm not sure why that is, but it's a little bit troubling. And the other thing I will say is finding that couple. So the New York Times originally wanted to find a same-sex couple who were not white. The kids came there through another relationship, and it took 2 months, and we had to go through multiple gay groups to find anyone who could identify such a couple, even though by all evidence they are kind of the biggest portion of same-sex parents. So I think that the movement has to be a little more intentional in these efforts, or I would argue a lot more intentional, about both including not only the imagery, but including those folks into their, trying to sort of get them interested in the work of the movement.
Okay, so now I'm going to take your permission to be tough on you, and obviously you've been at the center of a very, as you described for us today, of a lot of controversy this week, and a lot of challenge, I think, as you said, from LGBT organizations and people, or at least consternation and anxiety. And I think the broader reaction to that is probably still to come. Right. So let me start by asking you, with the, whatever you want to call it, the 9 million, the 3.8%, the overall thing, which you've talked about a fair amount already, is there anything you would have done differently now than where you were a week ago in terms of how you put it out there and what the story is about to continue to unfold to be?
Yeah, I've thought about that. I mean, it feels like the only thing I could have done different is to even, so one of the things I tried to do in this Washington Post editorial is in some ways put some things into that perhaps now in retrospect language I should have put in. So when I said to you about, there's a difference between measuring identity, between measuring attraction and measuring behavior, and it's not inherently problematic that those numbers are different, and we shouldn't necessarily make assumptions. That isn't explicitly in that little research brief that I did, and it's created, again, some kind of drama around those numbers. I mean, the truth is that I think a lot of the angst is, and I also point this out in the op-ed, is, I was the kid, 30 years ago who was in a classroom of 50 people and looked around and said, oh, there must be 4 people like me. So that 10% number isn't just a number. I mean, it defined a movement for a long period of time, and it defined a lot of people's experiences of coming out, was this odd reassurance in some fashion that there were others like me almost everywhere they went. If there were more than 20 people, there was at least another person in there like me. And so I've come to better appreciate that that's an important dimension of that number, and that I have to be careful to not be flippant about that number.
So I'll ask you, again, another tough question that may be at odds with the real role of the Williams Institute and your role, but I'm going to invite you to comment on it anyway, which is, given what you just said, the number that's starting to get the reverb now is 9 million. Right. And so that's not 1 in 10, that's 3.8. What is it?
3.8% of
whatever
adults.
the hell that is.
Yeah.
So what number is the number we, whether it's we including you or we on our side of the work, really actually should try to create more reverb around and put out there, understanding that your probably first instinct is to say, well, there are 3 different things and each 3 is relevant and so on. We get that.
I mean, well, there's now actually there's already a Facebook group called 9 Million and Proud or something like that. I'm not joking. There literally is. So in my mind, as challenging as it is, I think from a movement perspective, we need. I think identity is still the measure that we kind of need to focus on, because it's so critical for the movement that people do identify in that way. I mean, you tell people all the time, come out, talk about your relationships, tell other people your stories. If we use some other measure like same-sex, I mean, do we really want Larry Craig in our group? And what does it mean that Larry Craig is part of what we're calling our group, when in truth, I believe that the truest statement Larry Craig ever said was, I am not gay. I mean, that man,
whatever he is,
he will never, ever call it gay. But so I do think that the identity number is, for movement purposes, it has that kind of salience, and I would kind of, but I'm happy to hear a counter argument.
Well, I've had 20 minutes to think of one, but so rather than do a counter argument, I'll push back on that and say, all right, so I understand the point you just made, and certainly there is something very significant in people who openly identify as LGBT or T. That said, there are a lot of Larry Craigs out there,
right.
And taking Larry Craig out of it, there are a lot of the people who are not anti-gay in the way that Larry Craig was, but who are not yet willing to identify as gay, et cetera, et cetera. And are we, by focusing on the 9% or allowing the focus to be the 9%, are we missing some opportunities?
9 million.
I'm sorry, what did I say?
9%.
Yeah, see, this is why I'm a lawyer, not a... Thank you.
Absolutely, the answer is yes, because the other, you know, play my own devil's advocate, the other argument is that the closet is also a part of our narrative, and it's a devastating part of why LGBT people struggle in the way they do. The horrible the consequences of the closet are awful, and so I think that has to be reminded. I think the problem is I don't know how you count people who are closeted. Like, yeah, they don't want to be counted in that way. And I also think it's unfair, even if they're genuinely struggling with it, I'm not going to be the one telling them who they are, even in a kind of esoteric, statistical way.
But it's not just telling them who they are,
right.
or at least it's not directly necessarily telling them who they are.
Right.
It's telling...
But in a big picture way, if you try to kind of inflate the numbers in a way that you're trying to account for the closet, you're implicitly kind of enforcing an identity on people who are not yet at a place where they'll use that identity. And as much as I think the closet is problematic, I think it's more, I would argue it's as problematic to kind of make assumptions about where these people are going to go in terms of their identity. And, you know, I still just think that in both in a totally practical way, as well as sort of in a theoretical way, it's better to use just a straight-out identity measure.
So you talked about the three different things, and it's okay that there are three different things, and some people are going to agree with you, and some people are going to come to agree with you, and some people are not going to agree with you. But what I'm interested in, and the three different things are essentially expression or identity,
right.
And that's the number you're most focusing on at the moment. There's behavior, and they're obviously...
That's 19 million in same-sex behavior.
There you go. The size of what state?
Was that
Florida?
New York?
Florida, right.
Florida,
so
yes.
So, because I thought actually this was a compelling thing you said. The identity number, the 9 million...
is New Jersey.
Is the size of this population of New Jersey. And I think even to say it that way immediately makes it sound more compelling. So it was a good formulation you did, and we all should be repeating it. And then the next one was behavior.
And that's Florida.
That's Florida. And then there's attraction.
And that's Texas.
Right, and that's... And that's how many million?
27 million, I think, almost.
Okay. So you talked about those three, and I'm guessing your basic, I don't want to say line of defense, your basic line is probably going to be, it's okay, there are those three different things, and that's the nature of the beast, and that's what we do on your side of the table. So, but I actually thought you added a fourth one today, and I'm wondering why that isn't equally given weight and whether there's more to be done with it, and that was relationship.
Well, and it's interesting, going back to your very first question to me, I struggled with whether to include the same-sex couple stuff in that brief. And I made a decision not to, mostly because I really thought it was... So, you know, I've done all this work with same-sex couples. The other pushback I get constantly is, all you do is same-sex couples, that's not including everybody, we're not in those numbers, and I get kind of a lot of pushback.
Well, I never hear that.
Right. And so, you know, I made a judgment call that anybody who wants to find out about same-sex couples, I give a nod in the report. I acknowledge that that's another way. There's 2 or 3 sentences that's a way that some surveys have been used. But I intentionally decided not to use the census data because, one, that's out there a lot, and I think these other estimates are not. And 2, I wanted to keep it as focused as I could, and the other component of that was I believe this is the first attempt by someone to say based on population-based surveys, this is the size of the trans population. And I think that number is a little more speculative than the LGBT number, but nonetheless, it is based on population-based data.
Well, it strikes me, reading the brief, I think on a plane or something a couple of days ago, and then in the conversation that's followed or just begun over the last couple of days, I actually think the 4 are very important, and I would encourage the Williams Institute and certainly the rest of us to add the 4th, because it is a very real other way of doing it. It's the same kind of flip the map thing.
Right.
It's an important part of the conversation, and it's a valid aspect to it.
Fair
and
enough.
what state is it? What size?
Oh, I'd have to think
500
about that.
something?
It's what's 1.16 million.
Above Delaware?
So,
Or where
I don't know where. I'd have to think about that. I don't know.
Well, you get to work on that.
I'll figure that out.
So let me ask you one other question, and then I imagine that people have comments and questions as well, and that is that, so you talked earlier about how so much of the pushback or reaction you get is from the LGBT communities and us, and a lot of the reaction in the last couple of days has been this surprise, consternation, criticism, and so on. And the rest of that will play out. But what is the opposition going to do with what you've put out there in the world, and what should we be doing to address it?
Peter Sprigg was delighted. So Family Research Council, his take on this was the fact that so this is fascinating to me. The fact that half of LGB, what he was delighted about was that half of the LGB was B, because in his mind, bisexual means
well, that's him.
Right. But in his mind, bisexual implies sexual fluidity and non-immutability. That's what he attributes to bisexuality. And so he loved it. He thought it proves his case that it's really rare for people to actually be, just really gay. And so
what do we do about it?
Well, and I think, I have not seen many cases where their critiques, to the extent that they do it at all of our numbers, hold much weight or salience. And while I think that there are certainly times when there needs to be a response, I think for the most part, the fact that they rely on us at all for data to talk about this community is indicative of the degree to which they really don't care, and perhaps to point that out. But I haven't seen them use our work in any way that I would call as devastating to us as a movement.
Well, but it's not, we're obviously, it's not so much about talking to them or what
Right.
they do. It's what is the answer? What are we saying to the American people?
Right.
How are we moving people?
Well, I certainly think in those bisexual numbers, clearly there's some education to be done. The AP story that originally came out when that report released, first of all, it was like a 1.5 paragraphs. It completely eliminated bisexuals and transgender from. It just reported that there are 4 million gay and lesbian people in the United States, and it just ignored the bisexuals and the transgender. And then a second longer story came out of the AP, and I don't want to get into sort of critiquing the sort of rhetorical critique, but it positioned bisexuality, even despite Peter Sprigg's statement, even the frame of the story was that bisexuality is this kind of something weirder than gay or lesbian, that it's like some strange state that doesn't deserve the prominence of gay and lesbian. So I think there's some education that needs to be done to the population.
So a round of applause for Gary, for Mike, and the Williams Institute.